Hey, this is Mike Kimball. I'm a contemplative anthropologist at the University of Northern Colorado on Dov Barron's show, where we're going to be covering a few topics. One of them is the matrix of culture. Another is cultural discomfort zones. How can we turn towards our own pain? And then how leaders can hack the matrix to align themselves and their teams with their missions and meaning. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Barron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Barron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Barron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Barron, the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. Today we're going to be taking an insider look at the cultural matrix and cultural intelligence and how you might find yourself a bit stuck, and it might actually be blocking you as an individual and as a leader. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. Remember, you can now find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you pick up your normal podcasts. We also need your help in staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It really matters and helps us, so thank you for doing that. And when you do, please go to our Facebook page, and you'll find it right there on Facebook, the Dov Barron Leadership Show. And tell us what you got out of the show. Let's have a chat about this. Let's have a communication and really engage a little more. Of course, you can also find us on traditional radio stations now across the United States in 13 markets every Monday and every Thursday, ranging from Las Vegas to Philadelphia, all the way to Colorado. And you can also find us on Roku TV, where we're over 100,000 subscribers and listeners every single day. We're grateful for being the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. We really appreciate it. And also, you can find us on Alexa and Google Home. So check it out. All right, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, C-suite leader, sales leader, entrepreneur, or leader in any capacity, you know that business is global. And if you don't know how to traverse the cultural matrix, it could bring you and even your organization down. So how can you breach your own cultural bias while going global? What if you had a guidebook for cultural intelligence? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. My guest today is Dr. Michael Kimball. Michael Kimball is a mindfulness teacher, archaeologist, and self-described contemplative archaeologist.
I complain too.
A complaining contemplative from the University of North Colorado, with a wide range of experiences in conducting archaeological research in Western Europe, exploring the ruins of the Mayan civilization, and studying cultural native, this is interesting, ancient Native American rock art in the United States. He's also collaborated in Southeast Asia, East Africa. I mean, the guy has done all kinds of stuff, works on heritage work here in the United States. Moreover, on top of all of that, he is a dedicated mindfulness practitioner. He's trained in both Western secular Buddhism and the Buddhism meditation traditions, and he's also rigorously investigated the cultures and influences of our own perspective of biology and behavior. His latest book, this one right here, Ethno-Wise, in it he shares his discoveries and gives us some pro tips on hacking into what he calls our cultural matrix to build a cultural intelligence within individuals, teams, and beyond. So what if you had that guide for cultural intelligence in your hands? I do. and it's delicious. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Michael Kimball. You hear the crowd in the distance?
I can. It's deafening.
Hath no wise. Hath no wise. Thanks for joining us, Mike. It's good to have you here, my man.
Great to be here, Dov. Thanks for so much for inviting me.
Really looking forward to this conversation. As people can see, if you're watching this on video, that I have my markers in there. You can see highlights on the page. This is a phenomenal book. So insightful, so clear.
Thank you.
So let's sort of jump right into the deep end if we can.
Sure.
For our listeners, for our viewers, when you say a cultural matrix, what does that mean? Because we think of the falling green symbols from the movie, but what does it mean when we talk about a cultural matrix?
Yeah, the reason I called it a matrix, and this is what I think more and more scientists and psychologists and anthropologists are starting to realize, is that that's what we all live in. We all live in a matrix. Now, it's not generated, as in the movie. It's not generated by machine overlords. At least I don't think so. That's right.
As far as we know.
If you talk to some of the Silicon Valley folks, they might differ. But
exactly.
But I think if we think about it as a matrix, again, thinking about it as a whole body, whole mind kind of world that we live in, it starts to get us, changes our expectations about our experience of the world and our experience of other people. So, it's when I say whole body, whole mind, I really mean that. I mean that, it isn't just something in your head. It isn't some kind of way of seeing the world, although that's part of it, but it's also a way of feeling the world. And
let me just stop you there, because there, because I think most people can sort of get their head around, okay, maybe I see the world through my own lenses, and maybe that's a bias or whatever it is. But you're talking about feeling the world differently, feeling those different. Tell us about that, because I think that's a quite a distinction for most people.
Yeah, absolutely. When some of your listeners have taken, college classes in anthropology and so forth, they've learned about other so-called cultures of the world, and they've learned how people, think and behave and all that sort of thing. But very rarely do we turn that lens onto ourselves. Very rarely do we understand that we are physically living in the world and physically experiencing the world, but all of those sensations that we have and how we interpret them, they're all culturally mediated. So, when I feel something in my body, I may not even know I'm feeling it in my body, but it's going to generate some kind of emotion or thought. I'm going to be reacting to that. So really, it's about knowing how we are raised to experience the world in such a way that we physically respond to it and then interpret those physical responses basically unconsciously to mean certain things.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with Dave Scroggins, who I don't know if you're familiar with. And Scroggins talked about how going through pain and that pain for most people is a signal to stop. And for him, it's a signal to go. And that's what. Am I on track here with what you're talking about the physical cultural conditioning?
Yeah. For those of us who come from what some people are calling weird societies, and that's an acronym. Right. So weird means Western. The E in weird is educated, and then it's I for industrialized, and R for rich, as in affluent societies, and D for democratic. So when we're coming from that kind of world,
I love that acronym.
Yeah, isn't that great? Weird. Yeah, many of us and many of your listeners are weird people, just like me. And so when we look at it through the weird lens, it doesn't take much reflection to realize that we run away from pain. That's kind of how we're conditioned. That's why we have a society that's full of pain relievers, whether it's, an aspirin or some form of entertainment, some kind of substance. And so we're always
an opioid crisis.
Exactly. We're trained, really. We're enculturated is the fancy word for that. We're enculturated to turn away from that, to run away from it, in fact. And so there's a lot to be learned by turning towards those kinds of areas of discomfort, what I call cultural discomfort zones. The things that trigger us, the things that actually make us want to run away are the things that can be our best teachers.
So let's go to that, because I think that is so fascinating. That's part of what I was looking at in the book that I just loved. Because one of the things that I've talked about a lot is when people go looking for their purpose. My work is around purpose, and people go looking for their purpose, and they go looking for it in the wrong place. And so you can't find it there, because we go looking for our purpose in what makes us happy.
Yeah,
you think,
that's
this
right.
makes me joyous, and this is my purpose. No, that's actually not your purpose. That's your passion, sure. It's wonderful, but your purpose is actually found in your pain, and the idea of turning to your pain, which Campbell taught us, Joseph Campbell taught us, which Young taught us. You're looking at this now even culturally, and I found that fascinating. Talk to us more about turning to our pain, turning in the direction of.
Yeah, sure. So, we walk around a lot in our lives in our own comfort zone. We like to cultivate a comfort zone. It makes us feel safe, and it can sometimes make us feel powerful, make us feel confident, all those kinds of things. And I agree with you when you talk about happiness. This is a very misleading term, right? Because that's culturally mediated too. So sometimes I feel like maybe I'll be happy if I have the next Tesla model or something like that. Then I'll have happiness. But actually, when we acquire these things that we think misleadingly are going to bring us happiness, we experience a little bit of a bump there for a while, and then it fades away, and we're left looking for something else. And so I agree with you. When you turn towards something that's painful, everything about it is going to want to make you run away and find something that makes you quote unquote happy again. And a lot of times, though, when we walk around in our comfort zones, it's very difficult for us to really know what it is that makes us uncomfortable and what we can learn from that, because we're protecting ourselves. So that's what's so great about cultural discomfort zones. On purpose, stepping out into an area where it's full of values, worldviews, expectations that completely conflict, or at least in some significant ways conflict with the ones we carry around with us. And it's like a wake-up call. And so really the flag that goes up, or the alarm that goes off on your wake-up call, is the one that says run away. And then you know you're stepping into something where you have a lot to learn.
So, you've traveled a lot. You've traveled around the world. You've worked with different cultures. You've done all this kind of thing. Did you bang into that yourself, where it was like, holy crap, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah, absolutely. It happens to me all the time when I travel, because, it's an ongoing process. It's not something where all of a sudden I wrote the book and suddenly I know what's going on. No, I wrote the book because I'm screwed up. I wrote the book because I can't see clear, Right. And so what I need are guideposts. What I need are lenses that I can kind of clear off and have a better look at things. And so for me, it's what I'd call an ongoing practice, So when I travel, I'm constantly confronting my cultural discomfort. And what it does, of course, is it triggers all kinds of stuff from childhood, and my reactivity and my defense reactions and all those kinds of things. But, in doing this kind of thing, you start to, maybe befriend those reactions, start to know them as your conditioning rather than believe them. And so one of the things I talk about a lot in my book is the power of stories, and how, and you had a guest recently that talked about stories. This is super important for us to understand that as human beings, we're all about stories. When we talk about the human species, we use the word Homo sapiens, but some people have suggested it's Homo narrans, which means, man, the storyteller. Because we're all about story. Matrix comes in, right? Because, when you think about the Matrix, it's telling you a story all the time and you're believing it. And when you take it for granted that it's true, you miss out on all these opportunities to question the very core parts of yourself that need the most light shown on them.
Absolutely. And the book starts out by breaking down what it means to be human. And you sort of touched on it there, and that's why I want to go into that. And 5 distinct principles. Sort of walk us through a little bit of that so that people can get a sense of it.
Sure, yeah. So I have 5 principles there, and they come from anthropology, they come from neuroscience, they come from psychology, lots of different fields. and my own lived experience, because I've tested all these things out.
Sure.
And that's the invitation of the book, is try it out, see what you think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the first one is just what we've already been talking about. The first principle is culture. Culture is a matrix. But that again means it's a whole body thing. So there are what I call different portals into that matrix, right? So, one of them, of course, is, how do I see the world? What do I expect about the world? The intellectual side of things, that's a way of looking at things. What am I taught to believe, But there are so many other ones. And, our bodies have many different senses, sensory organs. So we take the world in through our sense of touch, through smell. I mean, just think about smell for a moment. When you're walking down the street and an aroma comes across you, what happens? You don't just think, oh, that's roses, or oh, that's coffee. It conjures up images. It conjures up emotional reactions and that kind of thing. So we're actually trained, in our upbringing to experience aromas through a cultural kind of filter. So there's all these different portals into it, and you can experiment with each and every one of them and discover some of the hidden aspects of being this kind of enculturated animal.
But so just coming back for a minute, and I want to keep going here, but I just want to go to something which is, you and I talked about in our previous conversation that was not recorded, about personal emotional resonance fields and the personal filters that we have. And you use the context of olfactory and smelling. For some people, the smell of cigarette burning is enticing, and for me, it makes me want to vomit.
Yes, right.
But it's me, right? And I know that's my bias. For some people, the smell of curry, and they're like, ugh. And for me, it's like, I start salivating.
Same here.
Right? So, we've got very personal. For me, and this is, I actually diagrammed this out. So for me, there is my personal resonance field that contains all my personal bias, and that's what they are. They're bias and filters through which I look at the world. But my cultural matrix, my personal matrix, is inside a cultural matrix that is my family, and then maybe my faith, and then maybe my nationality, and et cetera, et cetera. So it seems to me, Mike, and this is one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about, because I wrote about it in my dissertation, is that in many ways it's layered upon layered upon layered upon layered upon layered, and for a lot of people it can feel like I'll never get past this, so I might as well just hunker down and claim the fact that I'm white and white is right, and whatever the other nonsense is that's stuck inside of our heads. Help us to grasp, because it can feel so oppressive for people like me who are explorers, psychological and mental and spiritual explorers. But it can feel so constricting for me. But for many people, I think it feels almost like there is nothing else. When you live inside 10 layers of it, it's kind of like, no, you guys are crazy. This is all there is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I mean, there's different things we do with those layers, right? I mean, we give them, we put them on, or we wear them in our lives to provide us with a sense of safety, and they're also a defensive armor for encountering things that challenge us, challenge our worldviews. And so, for me, this is where the mindfulness part comes in, right? Because, when you practice a mindful awareness around this, you're not looking to accomplish anything when you explore these layers. You're not looking to get rid of them. You're not looking to make them change. You're just noticing them in the present moment and how they're affecting your behavior, your thoughts, your bodily reactions, and things like that. And so that's a practice. That's not something you can't read a book and get that. You have to do it, and you have to do it again and again and again. And what it ends up doing is changing your relationship to those layers. It doesn't change the layers necessarily, but what it does is it changes the relationship you have with them, which means you're less identified with them. You're less inclined to say, that's me, that's who I am. You're more inclined to say, oh, that's interesting. Look what came up. Look what came up. This is another one of my layers that happened as a result of my growing up in this kind of cultural matrix. And you don't feel invested in protecting them, and you don't feel as inclined anymore to wrap yourself in them as a way to defend yourself from the unknown.
So, the book is broken into 3 parts. Is the mindfulness a tool, or is it the path?
I think,
or is it both?
yeah, I think it's just like, I don't know, I guess it's a cliche nowadays, but one of the ideas around, like, why do you go to the gym, right? You go to the gym to improve your health. The gym has tools in it. You might have, machines for lifting things. You got the treadmills and so forth. Those are the tools. But the gym, is it a path? Yeah, it's a path towards better physical health and better mental health. It's the same kind of thing with mindfulness practice. It has many tools. There are many tools that are in that particular gym. And when you're using them on a regular basis, you find yourself moving in a direction that's different maybe than where you were heading before.
So let's go back a bit to you. How did this all start for you? What made you decide to be an archaeologist? Were you some weird kid who dug shit up in the backyard, or what was it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a lot of experiences in my childhood and later on that were hints that this is something that I wanted to do. For example, when I was 16 years old, I went out to a place called Mesa Verde National Park, which is, I think, one of the only archaeological national parks in the United States. And but I wasn't there to check out the sites. I was there to build a fence line. I was on an outdoor backcountry project with a bunch of other kids through the Student Conservation Association, which is a voluntary organization that brings young people in to do work that national parks, let's face it, can't afford to do because of the way they're funded. So I was out there with a bunch of other kids and some leaders, some adults. And our job was to put up a fence line on the park boundary in the middle of nowhere, or at least it was nowhere to us anyway. Sure. And I didn't know really anything about Mesa Verde National Park. I didn't know anything about the native people that used to live there, what they call now are the ancestral Puebloan people. I didn't know anything about that. I was just out there to live in a tent, get really grungy, eat food around a campfire, and put up a fence line. And so, I was sitting there once. We had gotten back from work. It was late afternoon, and we were hunkering down, pulling out food and that sort of thing to get up, set up for the evening. And I don't know, but it was a smell. When we talk about the sense of smell, there was smell in the air of the sandstone and the sage and the shadows were coming up, and there was a nighthawk that was circling us, making these noises that were almost unearthly. And I thought, I've got to get out of here. I've got to explore. So I just left the campsite and started wandering. And I was on a dry wash. Yeah, it was like being pulled. Really, it wasn't really driven by intellectual curiosity. And so I'm following this dry wash, and it's an area where during flash floods, water would be coursing down there and tipping over the edge of the canyon into the bottom of the canyon below. And I just followed it, and I felt like I was being pulled. And I got up to the edge of the canyon, and I got on my hands and knees, and I just looked down into the sagebrush and the cliff face and that kind of thing. And I noticed that this dry wash wasn't just going right off the edge of the canyon. There was a lip there. And so when I crawled on my belly to the edge and looked underneath the lip, there was a building under there. It was a piece of Puebloan architecture under there. I don't know if it was a storage unit or something like that, but suddenly it was way beyond, ancient people are fascinating. And it was a full body experience. It was an experience of feeling, tasting what was in the air, seeing what I was seeing, hearing the sounds, feeling the textures, and suddenly connecting with what I imagined was a far distant and far exotic for me past that I hadn't ever thought about before. So those are the kinds of experiences I've had numerous times where it wakes up something in you that makes you realize that the external world invites you to explore the internal world.
Wow, that's a great story, man. Just, because as much as I think we and certainly us weird people, us in the West, love to think we can get there by thinking.
Yes.
There is something that happens viscerally You know, when we're doing something that changes absolutely everything. You know, and the analogy I've given many times is you know, it's a rainy Sunday afternoon, you're flicking through the TV channels, and that one of those what do they call them? I think you call it victim porn or something is on, which is, you know, the people in Africa who are, you know, the kids with bloated bellies and flies on their faces, and somebody's saying, you know, send us $30 a month to take care of these kids, and most of us, if we watch for 15 seconds, we'll flick by and go to the next channel, and we find a movie we like, and we, you know, even if we've seen it before, we watch it. And I say, you know, if I stopped you right there, before, just as you flicked out and said, what do you think about those kids? You'd probably say, oh, that's really sad, and, you know, I wish I could do something, but I don't really think $30 a month is going to make much difference, blah, blah, blah. And I say, okay, fine. Now I put you in a teleporter, and I take you to that village, and you live in that village for 3 days, not longer, just 3 days, that's all you need. 3 days, eating, sleeping, being with those people in the way that they are. What do you think would happen to the way you would be about getting people to send money? And because there's that visceral experience. Now, the question is this, you know, if you look at the circumstance, did anything in the circumstance change? No. It's your experience of it. And for me, when you and I were talking before, and I thought, that's a great analogy of the cultural matrix, is that you can't get it conceptually. Right. So how do we get leaders to grasp this? Because you can't get it conceptually. And many of them, it is a concept. It's a concept that they've got people working for them who live in Southeast Asia. They've got people who are working for them potentially in Africa or India. They've got people who are working for them in Holland. And those are very different cultures. And they go, you know, and meanwhile, I'm in headquarters in Iowa. Yeah. So how do you get them out of that intellectual concept?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's a few steps. And the point that I want to make here is that you don't actually have to go to the other side of the world to get into cultural discomfort, right? You could have a workplace where someone in your workplace is coming at the world from such a different angle that you find it distressing. And you find all kinds of judgments coming up when you think about them, or you think about the work they're doing or something like that. And again, we take those judgments because they're coming from our own heads, our own minds. We take them to be, you know, unquestionably true, because I thought of it, right? You know, I can question something somebody else says, but if I'm saying it in my own head, it's got to be true. And this is the story part of it, you know. So we're surrounded by opportunities almost 24/7 to engage in that kind of discomfort. So that's one of the things, is consciously looking for those opportunities and not taking them for granted, and not taking our thoughts about them for granted, recognizing that they're going to come up because we're uncomfortable, and not to believe them right away. So that's part of it. And, you know, in the first part of the book, I talk about learning your ABCs. And so what I mean by that is that there are three kind of broad spheres that we can explore when we're stepping into that cultural discomfort. And one of those is what psychologists call affect, which means how you feel. And so, you know, a lot of times that could be emotions, but we have to recognize that emotions don't just float around disembodied. They come from somewhere, and the place they come from is our body. And so when we're physically experiencing something, whether it's positive or negative, we learn to assign emotions to them, you know? So it's quite possible to encounter somebody in the world who assigns a completely different emotion to the same bodily sensation. So we have to understand that in our cultural matrix, the meaning that we assign to those bodily sensations is largely, you know, culturally mediated. So
can you give us an example of that? Because that's great. That's really good. Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah.
So the people who are not, you know, who are weird, Westerners, can really grasp that.
Yeah, in the very beginning of the book, it's kind of interesting. There's an example coming from a news article that was looking in the Caribbean, looking at art that was left by indigenous people there, and that the colonial Spanish encountered back in the 1500s, and they saw these faces that were depicted on walls as grimaces and evil and, you know, almost cannibalistic grins on the faces of people depicted by the indigenous people. And what they were doing, of course, was bringing their own baggage, if you will, to the experience of seeing these grimaces. When in fact that art was representing welcoming smiles. that the people depicted in the art were actually not angry and dangerous, but instead were exhibiting what they interpreted to themselves to mean was something more welcoming. And so, when we see somebody smiling, a lot of times we think it means, just a smile, we think it might mean happy. But, there's been some really interesting cross-cultural psychological research, which found that there are some facial expressions that we can read more or less correctly. And then there are some that we just completely misread. And we just bring with us expectations about what those facial expressions mean. So, when we're paying attention to that and bringing a question to it rather than an answer, we start to learn something. We start to learn that, I'm having a physical reaction. I'm having an emotional reaction to seeing something, the body language of another person, what they do with their arms and legs, their facial features, expressions, and things like that. I'm bringing my interpretation with me into that encounter. So we want to just be noticing that. We want to be paying attention to that and also noticing our physical responses to it. So this is something that, in anthropology, it's interesting. This is why I call myself a contemplative and a complaining. Contemplative anthropologist is because, in the field of anthropology, where they go to other parts of the world and learn all kinds of fascinating things about other human beings, there's some training in how to recognize your own cultural conditioning when you go into that. So that's important. Yeah. What there isn't yet, though, is the deepest training, which is to bring that kind of mindfulness practice to it and really get to know where your feelings are coming from and how they're conditioning your reactions to things. So that's just taking it into another step, going a little deeper in it. If you want to use the metaphor of excavation, like an archaeologist, that's what you're doing. You're doing that very systematically. So that's affect. Looking at how am I reacting physically to this encounter. And when you start paying attention to that, you notice all kinds of things. You notice that your chest is tightening. You notice that there's heat somewhere or coldness somewhere in your body. And the more attention you bring to that, the more self-regulation you can bring to it, so that you're not reacting as much anymore. Instead, you're just noticing things. So that's affect, and then that's the A, and the B is behavior. So it's really what am I doing with my body in my interaction with somebody, and what kind of speech. This is something obviously in leadership that's really important. It's not just what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. And Absolutely. So if we're starting to pay attention to our reactivity around what we say to people, we start to kind of clue into the depth of our own reactivity, culturally conditioned reactivity. And then the last one is C for cognition. And that's just noticing the thoughts that come up. Again, they're very believable when they're attached to emotion. Emotion is a powerful motivating factor around my sense of what's right and what's wrong in what I'm thinking or what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and we're all absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Isn't that strange? How we can all be so right.
Exactly. And for me, I think that is probably the greatest challenge of humanity is to put aside our own being right, is to be willing to be wrong and willing to let another person be right, or even being willing to let us both be right in our own unique ways. You're talking about these cultural things, but I think a great analogy for people to grasp this is, and I don't remember who the quote was, but it's a very long time ago, and you may remember it, but there's a quote from someone who says, that people today, the kids today are ungrateful and they take things for granted, blah, blah, blah. And, and you swear that this quote is about the millennials. And then you realize that this is like 1,000-year-old quote,
that's right.
From like a Roman Caesar or something. Right?
Yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Yeah,
exactly. So, this is, for me, when I look at culture and this cultural matrix of bias that we take into another culture, we do it generationally too. So we look at millennials and we're looking at them, and I've said in the work that I do when I go and speak with companies or on a platform, I say that, the problem with how you see millennials is you're looking at them through baby boomer eyes. And if you're looking at millennials through baby boomer lenses, then you can't see millennials. You can only see millennials through the taint of boomers. And the analogy, the example I give rather, is to say, if you're a baby boomer and you're in your 50s or your 60s, when you started work, what time did you have to be at work? And I ask the audience, anybody who's a boomer should call it out. And it's always 8 or 9 o'clock. And what time did you finish? 5 or 6 o'clock. And I go, okay. So if you're looking through those lenses at millennials, now tell me, do they show up at work on time? No. Do they leave on time?
Exactly.
No. Well, guess what?
Exactly.
That's not how they operate.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's a great example because that allows us to be thinking about different cultural matrices rather than just those people over there, right? Because they're developing a sense of values and expectations that differ from those who are coming at it from a different generation, and it seems wrong, right?
Oh yeah.
And you can do that too if you look at different parts of the world and how people, and I address this in the book. You look at how people show up. And when they show up and what their expectations are when they have a party even, and they tell you, oh, it's at 8 o'clock and you show up at 8, it's an insult.
Yeah, it's culturally rude. Nobody shows up at 8.
Exactly.
If you're in Germany, you need to be there at 7:45. And if you're in Italy, which is actually a straight line a little bit south, if you're in Italy and you get there at 9, what the hell are you doing there? Nobody gets here at 9.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so, people from multinational companies and so forth are encountering that all the time. And what they're maybe noticing is that they're bringing judgment to it quite a bit. And, these people just aren't lining up to my expectations. They're doing it wrong. Then you start questioning their work ethic and all kinds of things. And these are just the thoughts that arise from your own discomfort. Yeah.
All those judgments come up. Yeah, I remember when I first went to Italy, I think I was 20 years old. And I went to Italy like, why are all the shops closed? It's only 2 p.m.
Exactly.
And siesta. What are these
wrong
people lazy?
With people? Yeah,
people lazy? They have to have a nap in the afternoon?
Right.
And they're having dinner at, being in Asia, being in a restaurant in Singapore 30 years ago, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and the place is full of kids.
Yeah.
Who are eating rice porridge.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. You're raising a really good point that connects up with cultural intelligence too. Because, the old definition of cultural intelligence is, I've learned a lot about a certain cultural group and I have a lot of knowledge in my head and maybe I can speak their language even, or at least, make some approximation to that. And then now I'm culturally intelligent. But now we recognize that actually the intelligence is in how you're learning. It's not in what you know. And if you're bringing with you that if you're learning your ABCs in the process of getting to know other people, you discover a heck of a lot more about yourself and build the relationships, the interpersonal relationships that you need to pull things off. That you want to accomplish. And, one example comes to mind that I don't mention it in the book, but there's a great TED Talk by an Italian social entrepreneur who his name is Sorelli is his last name. He talks about an example in the 70s when Italy was invested in, and it kind of goes back to your example about African countries that are in need. They were over there trying to help, quote unquote, help the African people. And so they were in an area that was a very rich river valley. And he tells this amazing story where, they thought they had the answers. They said, look at this rich valley. It's full of, soil that we could easily grow Italian tomatoes in, and you people wouldn't be starving. It would be fantastic. And they said to the people, why don't you start growing things? And the people just kind of shook their heads at him and kind of wandered off. And so he said, well, we'll just show you how to do it. So they paid them a little bit. He said, every once in a while they'd show up for work. They'd plant these plants. They grow these beautiful tomatoes. And they're like, see what we can teach you, we Italians. And then he said the very next day they came and all of the plants were destroyed because the hippos had come out of the river and eaten all the tomatoes. And he said they went to the people and said, "Why didn't you tell us this?" And the people's answer was, "You didn't ask." So, this is the thing.
Great example.
This is the thing that's what cultural intelligence is about. It's what I call in the book deep listening. It's about, engaging in a way where you're fully experiencing it physically, mentally, behaviorally, but you're also deeply listening to people. So rather than seeing it through the veil of your own judgments and reactivity, you're starting to learn. You see them as your teachers, and that changes the whole game.
Is that the hack, Mike? Is that the hack of how we hack the cultural matrix? Is simply, the simplest possible level is just deep listening?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. There's a lot of aspects to it we could talk about, but really it's about leaving your not leaving it, but recognizing. This is the way I look at it: is when we travel. We go through the security check. You got to pull out your toothpaste, and you got to have that. You got to have that in your hand, or put it in in a separate thing. And if you don't do that, they're going to stop you, and they're going to go through your luggage, right? And then you also sign a thing when you get your plane, your ticket that says, "I'm not carrying anything dangerous in my baggage."
Mm-hmm.
And so you think to yourself for a moment, well, I hope I didn't, And there was a time I had a folding knife in my bag, and I completely forgot. This was a number of years ago when I had little kids, and it was actually in the diaper bag. There was a Swiss Army knife in the diaper bag. Don't ask me why. And
you got some dangerous children.
Yeah, that's right. You got to be ready for anything nowadays.
That kid is carrying, my friend. That kid is carrying. Do not get into a knife fight with this toddler. You will lose.
That's right. You got to start him training him early,
Either that or he will open your wine. There's a corkscrew in there, my friend.
That's right. And a nail file, so be ready. Yeah, so this was hidden baggage, and that's kind of a great metaphor, I think, for thinking about what we're bringing to all of our encounters, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in another country. We got to get to know what's in our bags, and you can do a cursory inspection and think you're on top of it, but until you do that deeper look, and really turn towards that stuff that you didn't even know was there, and encounter all the emotions of wanting to run away that you discover who among us wants to own the fact that thoughts occur in our minds that are sometimes downright even racist. You could have something pop up in your head that's a comment. It's like somebody is living in your head making a running commentary of everything you experience. And some of those are really negative comments. And so, if we aren't turning towards that stuff, really looking at it and owning it and being curious about it and asking important and deep questions about it, we're just going to be reacting to everything and then calling ourselves, we're going to be saying, I'm colorblind, I don't have any problems. And then, you end up in encounters that either totally go wrong or ones that could have been much better had you done that work of exploring your own baggage, So that's a piece of it. But then there's the encounter itself.
All right, so let's go to that, because this is something that I find leaders bumping into every day, which is political correctness. Because I want to be clear here, because I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think you and I are on the same page here in that this is not about our westernized idea of not being racist or being politically correct. That's not the way, because I think that the political correctness is crazy, and I don't think it's actually develops any cultural intelligence. I think it actually makes it worse. What's your thoughts on it? You're a man of the world. This is your world. Tell us about it.
That's a great question. I think there's a lot of reactivity going on right now in both directions. There are people who are, anti-political correctness warriors out there trying to stomp on any effort to, take into account another group's concerns and pain.
Sure.
And then there are people on the other end who are building walls around their own group or other groups in order to protect them from pain. The common denominator there is pain.
Right.
What do we do? What is our relationship to pain? And so there are groups that are in, American society and elsewhere in the world who have a long history of pain caused by more powerful groups and governments and experiences, intercultural experiences and so on and so forth. And so denying that legacy, it means that you're not meeting somebody on the level playing field, So protecting yourself by saying, you can't talk to me, you can't use those words, you can't express yourself because I need to be protected from the emotions, from the pain that conjures up, is a mistake. That's an opportunity. But then on the other end, going in there expecting everybody to just get along without recognizing histories of inequality and abuse and exploitation, that's also really wrongheaded. But both of them have this common denominator, like I say, and that is, what do we do with pain? Do we look at it and find it in ourselves and relate to it and learn from it, and recognize it in others? Or do we just build a story, just tell a new story about what they're wrong about and how they need to fix themselves?
So, this is, for you and I, a very common thing, and I think a very important thing, which is this piece around pain. Mm-hmm. What was the pain that catalyzed you, Mike?
Well, fair amount. I was, but not the kind of trauma that some people experience. Obviously, I'm a white.
You mean you didn't fall on your head from a dizzy height?
There's that one too, right? Yeah. Not yet. Not yet. So much to look forward to. Yeah. So, my experience comes from, just my upbringing, and it's about being a white male in American society and what you're taught that's supposed to mean, right? Mm. And so, I don't have the experience that people of color have, and that people with different kinds of backgrounds have. A legacy of exploitation and even slavery. I don't have that, and I recognize that, and I'm not meaning to put my experience on some comparative level. Mm. All I'm saying is, in answer to your question, I was raised in a single parent household, my mom, and I was raised in a part of the country where real men are real men, and I had to learn. I didn't have a father really. He was peripheral for a while, and so I didn't have any kind of leadership model for me, and I had to make it up as I went. And there's the schoolyard bullies, and how do you deal with that? And I ended up with a whole set of perspectives and attitudes and approaches to getting along with people and getting along with the world. Some of which are great, and others of which are downright dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. And so, those don't go away. You don't just sort of realize, oh yeah, there were parts of my childhood that could have been better, and I'm just going to get on with life. Instead, it's important to sort of plumb those things and take a look at how they've shaped your character and shaped your judgment about other people and about yourself and so forth. So that's lifelong work right there.
Yeah, because again, that becomes part of the personal matrix. The personal matrix right. Of I because I was originally trained as a therapist, I would hear comments like all men are assholes or all women are bitches. Right. We'd hear these terms, and every time we create a globalized or generalized comment, that is our personal matrix. It's their own filters of nonsense. And when I say of nonsense, it's not nonsense to that individual. It's real and true. And as you said, that running commentary in the head is not, it's the truth. You don't call it your opinion. You don't call it your belief. No, you call it the truth until you become mindful enough to go, oh, I wonder if that is true.
That's right.
Most people don't get to that. And for me, you can never be a leader unless you can willing to stop and look at your personal matrix, your personal bias, and your cultural matrix. I mean, as we talked about, all those different layers.
Yeah, that's right.
You've been a prof in university. You've traveled the world as an archaeologist and anthropologist, and you've looked at all these different cultural things. What What is it that people just don't know about you? What is it that most people would not know about you that would surprise them?
Well, the whole mindfulness thing, that's interesting right there, because I had coming out experience, if you want to call it that, related to this thing, because sure, there's this so-called mindfulness movement that's happening in the country, but it's largely a sort of upper class kind of thing, very white phenomenon, and you got the white woman in a leotard in a lotus position on the cover of Time magazine and stuff like that, right? So it's and again, this is connecting up to my childhood. What is a real man? And we've got a lot in people who teach mindfulness, and it's diverse in terms of men and women now, but it's still male dominated. But at the same time, the message is not reaching people who are coming from lots of different aspects of society, and they just see it as some kind of fad that in some cases, just white people participate in, or rich people participate in, and there's a sort of softness about it, getting in touch with your feelings, and some people associate it with hippies, and so it's got a lot of baggage, and when I started to discover that the work I need to do was actually rigorous, that this contemplative stuff is rigorous, that you're really actually practicing those techniques of turning towards pain, turning towards the insights that you get from really understanding your relationship to yourself and to the rest of the world. I knew that I had to keep doing that. But I'll tell you what, when somebody says, what do you do for a living? I say I'm a professor, I'm an anthropologist, and most of the time I just kind of stop it there. They're going to say, first of all, what's anthropology? They're going to say, isn't that where you study dinosaurs? And then, that's a whole conversation.
Yeah, no matrix in that one.
Right. And then we never get to the subject of, if I'm sitting next to somebody on the plane and they say, what do you do? I'm going to be saying, I'm an anthropologist, because that's sexy. I'm been around the world, done archaeology and things like that. But I'm a mindful, I teach mindfulness. It's like, and then the eyes glaze over and it's like, So, so I'm slowly learning how to bring those two together. And I think they complement each other beautifully, but how you talk about it, that's a whole other thing. And so I'm still learning how to do that.
Yeah, there's some really great stuff in the anthropology of the mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And when I was in graduate school, I was with my wife, and we were looking at our finances, and they weren't adding up. And so I heard this woman on the radio one day. It was public radio, and she was a financial consultant. She had a little show, and I thought, I got to call her up. We need some advice. So I call her up, and I said, I'm a graduate student, blah blah blah. And she says, oh, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I do archaeology. And she said, why? And I'm like, well, because and then what I found myself doing is answering it like an archaeologist would answer it. I said something, kind of abstract, like, well, I'm interested in the transition from hunting and gathering to agricultural societies in Western Europe. And she's like, she wasn't happy with that. She said, no, I mean, why?
Exactly.
And I said, well, because I'm fascinated by, ancient ways of, no, she said, why? So she was digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And, I couldn't answer the question. I couldn't answer it in a way that she was satisfied with. And that stuck with me, for the last, 20, 25, 30 years is, why? And I think it comes down to excavation. It comes down to what you do physically to understand where people come from. You're out there with a trowel and you're scraping very carefully down into measuring the layers mapping the layers as you go down. And you start to uncover things that no one has seen for thousands of years, holding in your hand something that someone made 7,000 years ago and hasn't been touched since by human hands. That's a process of discovery and insight, And what I realized was that's exactly what I needed to do to my own experience. I needed to take those tools and do the same thing, systematic, rigorous, layer by layer, discovering those things, gaining those insights, and seeing how I connect up to the rest of the world. The working title of my book before it became Ethnowise was Culture from the Inside Out.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, one of my clients years ago described me as a psychological archaeologist.
Yep.
In that I'm digging through what's underneath. And the truth of the matter is that most people don't want to dig. They
right.
like to stay on the surface. But
exactly,
as I always say, there ain't many diamonds on the surface.
That's right.
You got to dig for those. And sometimes you got to dig them up as rocks and put them against the wheel and grind them a little bit.
And the other thing is like when you're doing an archaeological excavation, most of what you find isn't diamonds, right? Most of it is what is crap. I mean, It's like, literally sometimes coprolites, which is the fancy word for human, waste, fossil. Yeah. And so,
turds.
Yeah.
Wow, look at this. This is a turd drop 3,000.
Right, exactly. And now look at the information you can get from those. They're doing DNA studies on those things,
of course,
So, and sometimes what you find is just gravel. I mean, people are making some stone tools and they're just a bunch of gravel lying around. And you're left going, is this all there is? And where's the treasure? But actually that's the treasure, right? It's changing your relationship to what you discover.
Fascinating stuff, man. This is really fascinating. In all of this, what is it that's most practical for leaders listening, watching us to get? What is it you want to sort of have them grasp, get, walk away with, and put into action, which is even more important?
Yeah. For me, it's seeking discomfort. That's the key. Seeking it. And I love what you were saying about personal discomfort zones, right? Because those are inextricably blended with cultural discomfort zones. And so you can't really tell without a lot of careful excavation. You can't really tell what's cultural and what's personal. We take everything personally, So, but when you start to recognize the cultural components of that, then you start to take it less personally and realize, oh, welcome to being a human being. We live in relationship with each other. And so when you start to peel that onion, to use another metaphor, you start to find that those kinds of things you took personally, many of them aren't personal anymore. They're just part of being human in a society and in a cultural context. But you're not going to discover that until you actively seek discomfort. You're looking for it. You're not seeing it and then moving away from it. You're actually gravitating toward it. That takes a lot of courage.
So for me, I think that's probably the most profound thing anyone's heard on this show today, is to turn towards the discomfort, to turn towards the pain. And the analogy I've given many times in the work that I do is, I want you to think of anything you like that you're really good at. And now remember the first day you did it.
That's right.
The first day you did it, you sucked.
Yeah.
And it was probably painful.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance you wanted to quit. And
that's
now
right.
you
a lot of
don't
stories
even have to think about it.
That's right.
But it gave you this, as you said, it gave you the stories.
Yep.
It gave you the grit. It gave you the stories that has allowed you to reform and reshape yourself. And, and I've used this analogy many times. It's one of my favorites, is Michelangelo being asked, how did he create David? And he says, from that lump of marble, and he says, I didn't. I released David from, it was always in there.
You're right. That's a great story.
And that is it. But there's the pain of chipping away everything else.
Yeah.
And as you said, I think that this is one of the greatest challenges of our society, is that we're pain averse, we're discomfort averse, we're high on opiates, we're high on Netflix, high on anything to just ease the fucking pain. Instead of saying, what is it in this?
Yeah.
One of the things I talked about was the sweet pain. I talk about the sweet pain and the beautiful rage. And instead of looking at these things as negative, like the beautiful rage is I'm so frustrated, so upset that I will have to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The sweet pain is the moment of I cannot bear this anymore. I will no longer tolerate this in myself. I will no longer be unhealthy. I will no longer be the kind of person who looks at others in that way. And that sweet pain is transformational. And what we're talking about here is the great transformation of the human being by the entering into the discomfort that collapses and crushes and rips open the matrix that we've been living in.
Yeah. And coming from, living in American society for all the years that I've lived in it and growing up here, I can say that one of the things we're just spectacularly bad at here in this country is turning towards these aspects of our history that have conditioned how we see other human beings and how we interact with people from other parts of the world. And, we have this mentality. We first of all, we have a very short memory. And so, when something happens today, in a year, everybody's forgotten about it well before that. And the other thing we do is we just have this attitude is just like, let's just get over it. Move on, because we're very, and this is a good thing, leaning into the future. That's a very positive trait. But when you're leaving things behind as if you're escaping them, you're not going to learn anything from that. And so, as a country, the history of this country, it's been a lot about let's just move on, and why can't we all just get along without recognizing that the roots run very deep into some very dark soil. And again, it's about turning towards that, excavating it, learning from it, and then, transforming, as you pointed out, being transformed by it.
Yeah, and we got to finish. We're at the end of the show, but that's the piece is not demeaning it, because if we're always like, well, that's the past. I mean, I hear this from people all the time. They'll say things like, well, that's history, Dov. You just got to move on.
Right.
And my statement all the time is, your past is leaking all over your present.
That's good.
Right? It's already leaking all over your present, and it's about
bleeding. It's bleeding out of your
Exactly. It's leaking it all over it. It's bleeding out into your present, and the problem is you're so familiar with it leaking into your present that you don't even notice it.
That's right.
But it's flavoring everything. It's coloring your personal and cultural matrix, to use your language. Mike, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. I know that you and I could go for about another 14 hours. We
could, yeah.
Welcome to the marathon.
Exactly. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. It's been fantastic.
It's been fab. Please tell our viewers, our listeners, where they can find out more about you specifically and about this wonderful book, Ethnowise.
Sure. The book itself has a website. It's ethnowise.com. So you're welcome to go there. I do workshops, I do presentations, happy to work with people on an individual or collective basis, different organizations, you name it. I'm happy to talk with you, with anyone about what connects for them. So that's a great source for information about the book. You can always jump onto the web and look up University of Northern Colorado and my name, and you'll find me there too.
Fantastic. Well, again, Michael, it's been a true pleasure and an honor. Thank you, sir. We're deeply grateful for your wisdom and your knowledge and your willingness to share with all of us. And I really hope that, again, the people are more than inspired, but actionable on some of the wisdom that you've shared. It's been fabulous.
It's absolutely about the practice, not about the knowledge itself. Yeah,
exactly. So thank you again. And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in and being part of this. And dear viewer, remember, as always, don't listen to this show. Right? Do more than listen. Put it into action. Take note and experience it. Take yourself out in the world. question your own bias. I really challenge you to do that. And remember, the research consistently shows that one of the biggest challenges facing even the most successful companies is somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies often hit a point where they realize they're spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leave them at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training and developing of your talent, only to have them leave you before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Also remember to stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. Yes, we actually already have a Matrix. matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. There's no triple W. Just matrix.fullmontyleadership.com and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's free to you for being a listener and a viewer to us. And remember, you can catch us on Alexa and on Google by just simply saying, Google Home by simply saying, play Dov Baron Podcast. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about what could happen if you turned towards your discomfort. I wonder what would happen. Could you possibly breach your own personal and cultural matrix and become the outstanding leader that you dream of being? I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.